All right, welcome to the Week 7 Forum. When you hear the word authoritarianism, a lot of people instinctively conjure an image of what you mean. In ancient times, we would think of mad Roman tyrants like Caligula or Nero. Europeans would likely imagine Hitler or Mussolini or Spain's Francisco Franco and the fascism of the mid 20th century. When Latinos hear the word authoritarianism, they probably think of caudillismo or, the strong man on horseback, and they would think of people like the Mexican General Santa Anna who stormed the Alamo but lost Texas to Sam Houston. Or today they might think of Fidel Castro or, Nicolas Maduro. When Middle Easterners think about authoritarianism, Sunnis probably think of Syria's Bashar al-Assad, the Alawite ruler of Syria, and Shiites probably invoke Iraq's Saddam Hussein. With Russia and Eastern Europeans, the image they're likely to conjure might be Joseph Stalin, who killed millions of his fellow Soviet citizens. Asians might bring to mind Mao Zedong, who killed even more in forging the modern Chinese state. Or Southeast Asians might think of Pol Pot, whose Khmer Rouge regime liquidated 10% of their total population in Cambodia. Um, is there a unifying feature that binds all these images of authoritarianism together? It's certainly not ideology. Authoritarian regimes can profess fidelity to ideological doctrines all along the ideological spectrum, and yes, some authoritarian regimes are ideologically and even politically moderate in nature. So what commonalities can we see as we read this chapter? What are the key categories of authoritarianism? Historically, the oldest varieties are personalistic dictatorships, monarchies. Then you have theocratic regimes, which also have an ancient lineage. Then you have the bureaucratic authoritarian regimes, the most common subunit of which are military dictatorships. The most modern variants of authoritarianism are typically totalitarian regimes like Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union under Stalin, or China under Mao. I say these types of totalitarianism is distinctly modern because it was largely not feasible to take on these kind of totalizing penetrations of culture under pre-modern states. You have to have that extensive bureaucratic apparatus. Um, then you have all manner of differences between hybrid regimes that kind of mix different elements together. How do you tell the difference between a totalitarian and a personalistic, dictatorship as far as authoritarian regimes go? What distinguishes a theocracy from a bureaucratic authoritarian state? Uh, let's try to clear up any confusion we might have about that over the course of the week. For me, one of the most interesting discussions in Chapter 7 is the notion of illiberal democracy, which is a term that was first deployed by an Indian American political scientist, journalist, and CNN host named Fareed Zakaria, that references a state with some democratic features, but where political and civil rights are not consistently guaranteed and protected. Illiberal democracies emerge because a lot of non-Western cultures simply do not respect individual rights in the same, don't recognize individuality in the same way that Western cultures do. Zakaria has argued that countries like China, Brazil, India, and countries in Asia like Myanmar and Thailand and Vietnam are far more likely to evolve towards illiberal democratic regimes than they are the kinds of liberal democratic regimes that emerge in Western Europe and the United States. The same might be said of many countries in Central and Latin America and the Caribbean Basin. What do you think about that thesis? Do you think that's the likely trajectory of countries like India? Would you add Russia to that list of countries that, if they're going to eventually move in a democratic direction, will probably move in an illiberal direction? Might that be a phase that some of them go through on the way to more liberal regimes? Let me know what you think. Let's talk about it. So we have established that there are a lot of different flavors of authoritarianism. Now we can think about reasons why authoritarian regimes persist. What factors contribute, for example, to the stability of an authoritarian state like the People's Republic of China? The biggest challenge confronting any authoritarian regime is what? The ability to persist, especially in leadership transitions. When one person dies, that usually creates some kind of power vacuum that leads to intense competition and sometimes civil war. In China's case, the Chinese Communist Party has proven very effective at kind of tapping successors and creating a transition process that has minimized the kinds of power vacuums and conflict that typically, characterize authoritarian regimes. Now, recently, Xi Jinping, got himself named president for life, and that might be signaling a change in the nature of the Chinese Communist Party and of the Chinese state. But it's notable, that to this point, the Chinese state has proven to be remarkably durable. In other countries, leadership transitions can produce a great deal of stress and may in fact lead to revolutions or, some kind of authoritarianism that morphs into a different kind of authoritarian state. Iran provides a good example of that sort of situation where the overthrow of the monarchical regime of Shah Reza Pahlavi led to its replacement by a theocratic regime led by Ayatollah Khomeini. Now, these days, of course, Iran's regime looks a lot more stable because they have this, council of senior religious leaders. So leadership might take place behind the scenes, leadership transitions, unless, of course, you get another revolution. Another dimension of authoritarianism that we can discuss is the reversal of the process that we discussed last week, right? With democratization, we often visualize a country taking a path upwards, towards more responsive and effective government. With democratic breakdown, we think of countries sliding backward and falling into more repressive modes of governance. When you look at a country's descent towards authoritarianism, what are some of the potential causes that we can point to? Why did Weimar Germany in the 1920s fail? Why has post-Cold War Russia backslided towards Putinism? Why did Chile in the 1970s become a military dictatorship? Why has Venezuela fallen back into authoritarianism? Do each of these specific instances suggest fundamentally distinctive pathways, or again, are there commonalities? The country this week that we're profiling is Russia. There's a useful distillated summary on Russian history that should get you up to speed. Russia and its leaders from the 17th century on clearly aspired to become modern European societies. To what extent would you characterize those efforts as a success or a failure? Alexander the Great, Catherine the Great, all the greats. How has the struggles of Russia to modernize, how did that impact the efforts of Mikhail Gorbachev and Boris Yeltsin and now Vladimir Putin to kind of control and administer the Russian state in a non-autocratic manner? The idea of path dependence to me seems really important for understanding what's going on with Russia today. In addition to learning about the history of Russia, I want you to spend some time looking at Russia today. What are some of the key features of Russia? It's a federal republic like the United States. It has an independently elected president. Now, the text describes Russia as a semi-presidential system with a president and a prime minister, both of which have significant powers. But nevertheless, Putin, who has occupied both those positions, has managed to successfully, centralize the Russian state. What factors have contributed to Putin's ability to consolidate power over the Russian state? What are Putin's primary goals as far as we can tell? Right now, Putin is 66. In actuarial terms, Putin is living on borrowed time. Life expectancy for Russian males is, I believe, 66.6 years. So what do you think is likely to happen in Russia when he's no longer in power? In terms of political economy, Russia provides a wealth of issues to discuss. I think I mentioned the late John McCain's contemptuous remark of Russia as a gas station masquerading as a country. What advantages does Russia enjoy economically? And what challenges does it confront in terms of diversifying and growing its economy? All right. Hopefully I've given, this little primer has given you plenty to think about as we discuss this week's assigned material. As always, if you encounter anything that confuses you, ask a question in the forum. Let's have a great week.